Good morning and welcome to the latest webinar from the Sacred Safe Spaces Ministry of the American Baptist Churches of New Jersey. My name is Reverend Eric Hoheisel. I'm an Associate Regional Pastor for ABCNJ and I'll be your host for today. We're excited to welcome back Pat Stanislawski, Director of Partnering for Prevention, for the second part in a three-part series focusing in on parenting and understanding ways that we can strengthen families and increase positive outcomes for them. Today, we'll learn more about child development in light of social and emotional competency. Just a few logistical reminders as we begin today. This webinar is being recorded and will eventually be linked to the ABCNJ website so others can benefit from what we learned today. If questions come up for you today during the presentation, we encourage you to type them in the chat box. And at the end of the presentation, Pat will be happy to address any questions that you might have. If you have any problems or you get bumped off the webinar by your computer for some reason, you should be able to go back to the original Zoom link in your email and rejoin the webinar. I want to turn the webinar over to the ABCNJ Sacred Safe Spaces Coordinator, Reverend Estelle David, who will briefly tell you what Sacred Safe Spaces is and introduce our speaker again today. Estelle?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're glad that you joined us. Sacred Safe Spaces was started by American Baptist Churches of New Jersey, and we are trying to equip our faith leaders to prevent the abuse that we see in our community, domestic, sexual assault, and to heal our communities, to heal individuals who have experienced that. And our mission is to have faith leaders, congregation, and neighborhood groups working together to create a compassionate, healing communities that is safe for everyone, especially those who've experienced violence. In order to do that, we're trying to equip faith leaders with information about the problem, the resources that they can use to address these issues. And we're glad to have Pat here again to talk about what we need to pay attention to in our families and to create healthy children and healthy communities. Well, welcome, Pat.
Thank you. I'm excited to provide for you folks our second in a series on the protective factors. Actually, I'm going to deviate just a little bit from what Reverend Eric said at the beginning, and we are going today to cover the importance of social connections and helping folks when they need it, concrete support in times of need. And the next session we do is going to be about knowledge of parenting and child development, as well as the importance of developing the social and emotional competence of our kids. So without further ado, I'm going to move us on to our next slide. I just want to share with you that before we start, that everything that you folks learned today about the protective factors is so easily transmissible to your folks in the congregations that you serve. So even though we are talking about how you can work with families, it kind of starts at the top with you folks, because in order for your congregations to understand the value of the protective factors, it has to come from you. So I wanted to just make sure we are clear about that. So I'm hoping that you all will benefit from this and will kind of transfer that knowledge to the families that you serve. So the protective factors were intended originally to help strengthen families, and they've ended up doing so much more over the years. But I'm just repeating a couple of the slides from last week in case some folks who were are here today weren't there last week. So I just want to share with you that the whole point of the protective factors framework is to look at families through a different lens. I have spent a good part of my career looking at risk factors in families and trying to ameliorate those risk factors to work with families. And why I love doing the protective factors so much is that we are finally looking at what's strong in families. Because when we look at what's strong in families and we build on that, the results that we get are pretty amazing. So that's part of what this whole concept is based on. So we know that families gain what they need to be successful, the things they need, the tools they need, when there are key protective factors that are robust, and I would underline the word robust here. Protective factors that we use as a normal part of our lives. We've become so accustomed to using these protective factors that our families end up being successful and safe. This whole program, this protective factors framework, began with the Center for the Study of Social Policy in Washington. I put their website here for you folks to just jot down if you're interested in getting more. I mean, this is a very quick thumbnail sketch of the protective factors. And it is a research-informed approach, as you see. It has really three purposes. One is to make families stronger. The other is to help kids grow up to be the best they can be, to enhance their development. And then the last one is to reduce the likelihood that these children will be abused or neglected, so to keep kids safer. So it's based on engaging not only families, but programs and communities and building these 5 protective factors. And I want to just share with you that I have been doing an awful lot of work around the country and actually internationally as well, promoting the Strengthening Families framework. And we have now more than 30 states that are shifting policy and practice in order to focus on these and implement these 5 protective factors. The National Alliance of Children's Trust Funds is working on it, the Center for the Study of Social Policy, and many, many organizations around the country and around the world have developed this Strengthening Families approach to working with families. So this is not something that is just, just being done here or just being done, kind of haphazardly. It's been in place for a good 10 or 15 years. And many, many states are involved in implementing it. So these are the 5 protective factors that form this framework I'm talking about. The last time we were together, we talked about parental resilience. Today, we're going to talk about 2 others. We're going to talk about social connections, and we're going to spend some time talking about concrete support in times of need. So the first one I want to just talk to you about is social connections. So we're going to answer 2 questions around social connections this morning. One is, as you can see, why it is so very important that we encourage social connections with our friends, with our families, with our congregations. And the second thing we're going to talk about is how do we do that? How can we help families value, build, sustain, and then use these social connections? So that's my goal this morning, quickly. Why is it important and how can we do it? So why is it important? We are hardwired to connect with one another. As a matter of fact, when you hear about somebody some person who has committed an atrocious crime, one of the first things people say about that person is, he was a loner. Why do they say that? Because that's weird for us to be a loner. We're hardwired to connect. It seems unusual for us not to connect, right? And then this quote from Darlene Manini, I absolutely love. Again, I like to give people resources because I don't have time to go into the emotional toolkit that Dr. Manini has developed. But I loved her quote, being isolated without connections is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, health-wise. Pretty amazing. I'll show you another resource, great resource, Bob Putnam from Harvard University. People need only connect once every 3 weeks to get a psychological or emotional benefit. So what do we know about people who are connected to each other? We know they have lower levels of anxiety and depression. And each time I list one of these, I want you to think about how that relates to the folks that you serve, to the people in your congregations. Lower levels of anxiety and depression. We know they have a higher self-esteem when they connect with other people. We know they have a greater sense of empathy. Why? Because they connect with other people and they understand what it feels like. Empathy is about feeling. We talked about this in our first presentation. So they have greater levels of empathy. We also know that they are more trusting and more cooperative. And think about that. Of course, they're more trusting because they've learned to trust others. They've connected. They've learned what it means to be in someone else's shoes and also then to be able to trust that person. And more cooperative, sure. They're more engaged. They're more willing to participate, right? Which again, if we remember how this feels for us and our communities, is a really important piece. So how do we value, build, and sustain these connections? What can we do in order to help families connect? Well, I think we can do one thing from the pulpit is we can talk about it. We can talk about the value of being connected. We can talk about I almost said disadvantages, but I almost want to say dangers of not connecting, being isolated. Isolation, and I know I've done a session for your folks on child abuse and neglect. Isolation is one of the top 3 reasons why children are abused, and it sets an atmosphere for abuse, isolation. So it's important as we speak to congregants, whether we do it from the pulpit or in person, the importance of connection. I would almost say that it should be something that you maybe think about ending your sermon with, or inserting somewhere in your connection with people, asking, who have you connected with this week? I often give people a task when I do our longer seminars on social connections, and I say to them, here's what, and maybe I'll say this to you today, a little task for you. Before midnight tomorrow, I would like you to call someone. You can text if you want to, but call is better. Call someone you have not talked to in a long time and have a conversation. What's going on in your life? How are you? What's been happening? And then when you hang up, I want you to notice psychologically, even physically, how much better you feel. There's something about connecting that reaches deep into our DNA. So, asking people who they've connected to this week, giving them that challenge. This week, I want you to connect with someone you haven't connected with in a long time. We can also connect in bulletins, and we can stress the importance. We can write things like, this family is new to our church. Let's welcome them, right? Let's do something in a bulletin where we say the importance of connection, right? Maybe you put in Dr. Manini's quote. Maybe you do something in a bulletin that reminds people that connections are really important. And the other thing is through social media. I'm sure either through social media or perhaps even through websites, your own website, that you can stress somewhere messages like this previous slide that we saw, reminding people that connecting is critical to all of us. So how do you build those connections? What are some ways? Well, you can see I wrote church suppers here because, I think anytime we all get together, and that's part of why this whole coronavirus thing has been so challenging for all of us. we love to just get together and visit. It's just a wonderful thing to do. So church suppers are a way we can build connections, inviting new families to church suppers. Fairs and festivals. What a nice way for us to have fun at the same time, because and this is especially true now while families are going through such a hard time. They need to laugh. They need to have fun. I'm not sure if we can do any of this now, but we can figure out ways to do things outdoors. We can figure out ways to, get around some of this if we can, because it's so important to connect people. And mentoring new families or congregants that are new to your community. That's how you build social connections, connecting people. Oh, this is this family and this is that family. And let's see if we can connect those two. Part of why I love working with the clergy is that you have such a valuable role. And I don't even know if sometimes you realize what a tremendously I don't even know the word, perhaps I almost want to say critical role, because people look to you for guidance. They look to you for inspiration. They look to you for all the good things that they want and that they respect. And I think helping families connect and having you be that person who connects them is just such a gift. So I think that's the way we build social connections. We also have, also worked with some churches where book clubs were really a fun way for people to connect. Maybe you have families that, we've had that love to read, right? We've had children's book clubs where children connect, because, it's hard to connect with children and not connect with their families. Kids don't stand alone. So a book club is really kind of a fun way to build a connection. So what are some of the values that people get that then end up sustaining them? Well, I think one thing is they end up talking to each other. There is nothing nicer than being able to vent your frustrations with another parent, or as you see here, maybe to trade childcare, maybe to just talk about how wonderful it is to be a parent. There is nothing in the world that is more rewarding, aggravating, but wonderful than looking at these children and realizing you are raising a whole human being. And how amazing is that? And how amazing is it that for the most part, no matter how much we screw up, they end up thriving. But just talking about all those challenges and all those joys. And you see here, sharing resources, families that get together. Invariably, when we raised our 3 children, I found Little League games and basketball games and wrestling meets and dance class were the places where I actually learned a lot from other parents, both watching the parents in action, sometimes saying, wow, that didn't work out so well, did it? But mostly saying, wow, that was really wonderful what that dad did or what that mom said. So we learn from each other. And a lot of times we do share resources. Parents tell other parents where to go for this, where to get that. So these connections are incredibly valuable. And I wonder sometimes what it's like when a parent doesn't have all of that. And I think part of our responsibility, certainly yours as a clergy person and mine as a community activist, is to look around and find those parents who aren't getting all of this, right? Who aren't having these interactions with their peers and with other people in their community, whatever community that happens to be. So these are kind of some of the whys it's important, why it is important, and also some of the ways that I think churches can value these connections, And we do have to value them. We have to talk about them so people see we value those connections. And then certainly to build and sustain them. So that is the importance of social connections. That is one of the protective factors that we want to encourage families to develop among themselves. And I want to just add here that anything I'm saying here is also applicable to their children. Their children need to connect. And this has been one of the reasons why this virus situation has been so difficult for children. I know our grandchildren are missing their friends desperately. The little guys are missing them, the older guys are missing them. They want to go to school, they want to interact because, why? We are hardwired to connect. So this applies not only to adults, but also to our children, both young and old. So those are the kind of quick overview, thumbnail sketch of the importance of social connections. I want to move us on a little bit now to the next protective factor I'm going to talk about, and that is concrete support in times of need. And you'll see I underlined the word concrete, and that was very much intentional. We need to be specific about how we help families. There is an expression that people use all the time when someone has lost someone in their family, when they've had a tragedy, maybe there's been a fire, maybe there's been a flood, maybe there's been an accident, maybe a person has had a heart attack, and a friend will come up and say, listen, anything you need, anything, just call me, I'll be here. And the problem with that is that it is so broad-based. The parameters are so undefined. So I, as a person, will say to myself, what does that mean? What does that mean? Does that mean you'll come and pick my kids up and take them to school? Does that mean you'll make dinner for me tonight? Does that mean you'll drive me to the hospital every day this week? What does that mean? So the best way to offer concrete support is to talk to that person about what they need and then say, sure, I can do that. Otherwise, that person is not going to call you, almost guaranteed, because they don't know what the range of your ability to help is. They don't know. What does that mean? Anything. What does that mean? So concrete support means we need to talk to people about what they need and then say, sure, I could do that. So that's why I underline the word concrete. So why is this protective factor so important? Well, a couple of reasons, and this one's a big one. Because we hope we can change the way people feel about asking for help. People traditionally look at it as a sign of weakness, right? You need help. But we need, as people who are leaders in the community, to teach them and remind them continuously, it is a strength to ask for help. It is a strength. And we need to change that wording however we can for whatever communities we're talking to. You know, sometimes if you're talking to a community in which asking for help has been presented as a weakness for a long time, it's going to be a lot more work for you to convince those folks that it's a strength. So that's something individual to your community. And also, we need to, as a group, we need to understand that people look to us for help. And we need to make sure they know that we are there to offer that help if they need it, right? That's why this protective factor is so important. So how do we promote the fact that asking for help is a strength and not a weakness? Well, I think the first thing that we do is we talk about ourselves, because everybody in the world needs help sometime. There are none of us as human beings can live to the age that we are right now without thinking of a time when we needed help, right? So stories, I think, are the most helpful way for people to learn and to understand these concepts. Whether you do it from the pulpit, whether you do it from articles in your church bulletin, whether you put something on your website. But let me just say something. People need to know that you, as a person they respect highly, right? As a person who appears to have it all together, there were times when you didn't. And I think it's very important to share those times. And I'll tell you why. Because feeling like you're the only one who needs help is not only difficult, but it's painful. And it makes people feel like they're failures. So when you tell your story, then it makes a whole difference to them. And, I want you to talk about, if you do tell your story, who helped you, right? Who helped you when you needed help? And how did that feel for you as a person receiving help? What was that like? How did it feel? And then, which we often forget, how did it feel for the person who helped you? We forget sometimes how good it feels to help other people, and we don't realize that we sometimes, by not asking for help, are not giving those other people the chance to feel good, the chance to feel like they helped. It's a wonderful feeling when you help someone. Again, I believe that's part of our DNA, but I might be mistaken because some people are lacking that DNA. But it feels so good to help someone. And we need to think about that and examine how that feels. Provide ways to help those who need it. How do we do that? Well, one of the ways that I've always seen done in our churches is things like a crop walk, right? To raise money for families who might be food insufficient. And boy, nowadays, there are a lot of families that have food insufficiency. So people are doing crop walks to help, right? People in one particular community, I know that I've spoken to the folks from this church, and I thought it was an amazing idea. They created a Craigslist within the church, not outside the church, but within the church. And they did some bartering. So in other words, if one of the members of your congregation is a plumber and another person is a piano teacher, they end up exchanging their skills, their aptitudes with each other. So I need somebody to come fix my sink in the bathroom that's dripping. And also my son would love to play the piano. So there we go. We barter, and it's done within the church. So you're trusting people within the church, the community, and people end up helping each other. And guess what also happens? Social connections, right? So a double whammy there. We've also had people who are experts in the congregation offer their help free. So I put down a couple of examples that just came to mind. A master gardener in a church congregation may be able to go to, besides putting nice flowers and shrubs and bushes around the church, may also offer their skills to someone in the community. And those, again, that's a way to connect. Somebody who's really, really good at computers and may be willing to take 3 or 4 hours a week and just through the bulletin offer to help somebody. Yeah, does anybody need help? I know how to do an Excel sheet, right? I know whatever. Does anybody need help? Again, ways to connect. How can I fix your door? How can I fix the door in one of your bedrooms that doesn't close right? I'm a carpenter. I can do that. I'll do it for free. We'll come. We'll have coffee, and we'll end up helping each other. Again, all of this happens as the result of you as leaders in the community modeling this kind of behavior. So I said to you at the beginning, what we know, and we know this, folks, this is something, we've been doing this work now since 2005. So we have for a very long time understood the value of these protective factors. Asking people to connect with each other, talking about how we can help them, talking about resilience. How can we help families be more resilient? All of these three things we've talked about so far are, and you know what, are ways to build the families up, to help them be stronger and to keep kids safer. But you know what? These aren't, I'm not asking you to do big things. I'm not asking you to change the whole way that you write your bulletin or the whole way that you speak from the pulpit or the whole way that you interact with your families. I'm asking you to do small but significant changes to the way you do your work. Small things, little things, mentioning this, doing this, not any kind of huge curriculum. This isn't what it is. It's just a way to look at families differently. It's a way to focus on what's strong in families, not what's wrong, and a way to build those strengths. That's what we're asking. So the two protective factors we talked about today, social connections and concrete support in times of need. Last week we talked about resilience. Next week we are going to talk about how really important it is to have some idea of child development, to understand a little bit more about parenting. Because when we do that, kids are safer. And also, it's really important to help our kids be socially, emotionally competent. You know, teaching them to share, teaching them to have empathy. These are characteristics that are really important, and they round out the 5 protective factors. So these sessions are meant to kind of raise awareness and kind of help us think a little bit more about the families that we serve. So why are these protective factors so critical? To the 3 things, remember I told you that our goals, 1 is to make families stronger, 2 is to help children grow up to be the best they can be, and lastly, to keep those children safe from abuse and neglect. So how can we build, sustain, and value, build, and sustain these 5 protective factors in our communities are the questions we're trying to answer in the course of these different webinars. And I just want to add that the answer to all of these, how can you do this, is you. You can teach, you can model, you can promote these protective factors. And I can almost guarantee you that your families and your communities will be stronger, they'll be closer, and they'll be safer as a result of these small but significant changes that you make. Before we end today, I want to remind you of your task tonight for social connections. Before midnight tomorrow, everyone is going to call someone, connect with someone you haven't talked to in a long time and you kind of wished you did, but you haven't. And I want you to keep track of how you feel after you make that connection. And I am certain that you will feel good. So this is my information, and at this point, I think I'm going to turn this back to my friends, Eric and Estelle. I'm not sure who wants to talk, but I'm going to
I'll jump in. Thank you so very much, Pat. Once again, this has just been outstanding. You've given us great practical suggestions. I want to just leave a space here. If there are any questions that have come up, you can put those in the chat box for us. But I'd like to just piggyback on something that you said, Pat. And this is just a little different way of saying what you said so well, but I've often thought about the idea of if I don't ask somebody for help, I'm actually cheating them out of a potential blessing in their life. And that's really just a different way to say what you said so well in outlining these great suggestions. And I'm reminded as well about something that Mother Teresa said, which I think is, I'm going to paraphrase, but basically she said our task is to do small things with great love. And I hope that we can do some of these things that you have suggested to us. I don't see any specific questions that have come up for today, unless Estelle, you have anything else that you would like to add? before we close out the session?
I'd just like to thank those who did come today and invite you to our next one, which is October 24th, where we'll be looking at child development and, so that we can appropriately respond to the level our child is in order to help them to develop health in a healthy way. So I'd like to thank everyone who have tuned in today. Invite a friend for the next one, and we'll see you soon. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll hopefully see you on the 24th. Have a great day.
Thanks.